There in Virginia, a canyon is burning, not the slow creep of a brush fire working its edges in the October heat. This is fast, intentional, the kind of fire that knows exactly what it came to destroy. A truck idles on the ridge road, a man inside. Engine running. Every instinct he has pointed toward town, toward safety, toward the 7-year-old boy waiting for his father to come home. He counts to 40. Then he turns off the engine. Down in the canyon, past the wall of smoke and the falling trees and the air that tastes like something chemical and wrong. Something that doesn't belong in a natural fire. A woman is pressed against a boulder, injured, alone, babies. Holding evidence that someone powerful enough to burn 800 once destroyed. She doesn't know anyone is coming back for her. He doesn't know what she's carrying. Neither of them knows yet how much that decision, 40 seconds on a gravel shoulder, is going to cost them both. James Carter didn't plan to be a hero that afternoon. He planned to pick up a 6-pack of ginger ale from the gas station, drive the 40 minutes back down the mountain, and have dinner on the table before 7. Noah liked Tuesdays. Sing about Tuesdays felt manageable to a 7-year-old. No soccer practice, no homework due the next morning. Just the two of them eating whatever James threw together and watching whatever Noah picked off the streaming queue. It was the plan, simple, achievable. The kind of plan a man makes when his life has finally carefully settled into something that doesn't hurt every single day. The smoke changed that. It from the access road. Not the pale gray wisps of somebody burning brush on a weekend afternoon, but the real thing. Thick. Black at the edges, orange underneath. The kind of smoke that has weight to it. It presses down on the horizon like something alive and furious. The kind James had only seen twice before in his life, and both times from a safe distance on a television screen. He slowed the truck without thinking about it. The way your foot finds the brake before your brain catches up. Casca Ridge stretched out to the east of him, its canyon walls cutting down into the Virginia foothills, the way they always had. Familiar as his own driveway, every parking lot and trail entrance and rocky turnout he'd driven Noah to on 100 different Saturday mornings. 3 years of weekend hikes. 3 years of pointing at birds he couldn't name, letting Noah name them instead, because Noah had a book about it, and a serious commitment to accuracy that James found both exhausting and quietly magnificent. He knew this mountain, every turn, like drainage ditch and switchback, and the one section of trail about 2 miles in, where the ground went soft after rain and you had to stay right or you'd lose a boot. The firefighters had set up their line at the base of the access road. Engines, a crew chief with a radio, orange cones in a crooked row. "Sir, we need you to turn around." The crew chief didn't look at James when he said it. He was scanning the ridge line, watching the smoke move. Evacuation orders been in effect for 2 hours. Whole corridors coming out. "How far in, sir? How far has it spread?" The crew chief finally looked at him. Weather-beaten face, late 40s, look of someone who'd had this same conversation 60 times that shift, and was losing patience with each version of it. "Far enough. Please turn your vehicle around." James turned his vehicle around. He drove 50 yards down the access road, over onto the gravel shoulder, sat with the engine running and his hands at 10 and 2, and told himself he was going to keep driving. 1 second. 2, he counted them out. 40, actually. He counted to 40. H told him something he wasn't ready to examine, because people who are genuinely about to drive away don't sit there counting. Then he heard it, a voice. Not a scream exactly. More than a shout, less than a scream. That middle register that the human body reaches when pain and fear arrive at exactly the same moment. One burst of sound, swallowed almost immediately by the low roar of the fire working through the canyon. Had the radio on, he wouldn't have caught it. If he'd been 30 yards further down the road, nothing. But he wasn't. And the radio was off and the voice was real. He sat there for exactly 3 more seconds, then he turned off the engine, laid out, pulled the work jacket from behind his seat, heavy canvas, the kind that held water, and soaked it from the emergency jug he kept wedged under the passenger seat. Since Noah was 4 years old, and James discovered that parenting in rural Virginia meant being the person who had supplies, as the alternative was being the person who needed them. He wrapped the jacket around his shoulders, poured the last of the water over his hair. "This is stupid," he said out loud, to no one, to the gravel and the smoke and the orange sky. This is so completely stupid. Then he ran back toward the fire. The canyon had its own weather system by the time he pushed through the first wall of smoke. Heat pressed against his face like opening an oven. Actual radiant heat, the kind that didn't just warm you, but reached through clothing and skin and started working on whatever was underneath. His eyes watered immediately. The air tasted like scorched pine sap and something chemical underneath, something accelerant sharp that didn't belong in a natural fire. He filed that away, without knowing why. Because he knew this trail, that was the only reason he was still moving and not completely disoriented. Muscle memory of 3 years of Saturday mornings telling his feet where to go. Right at the split oak stump, left where the ground goes soft, stay high on the ravine wall, don't cut down toward the creek bed. He moved fast, called out twice and got nothing back but the structural groaning of a tree giving way somewhere above him, the sound of it falling through other branches on the way down. Not imagined. The voice had been real. He was certain. He pushed further in. Lungs started complaining on the 3rd minute. Not dramatically, not with the chest-seizing panic he'd expected, but steadily, the way your legs talk to you in the last mile of a long run when they're done negotiating. Short breaths. A wet jacket pulled up over his nose. Eyes down to watch the ground because the smoke was impenetrable at eye level. And then he saw her 30 yards ahead, slumped against a granite boulder at the base of the eastern wall. Leg extended at an angle that didn't look like a choice. Clothes torn at the knee. Hair ash gray from smoke, though it hadn't been gray 5 minutes ago. He could see that from the clean section near her roots. Blood at the temple, dried already, and it had been a while. She looked up when he got close, dark eyes. Sharp and focused despite everything. The eyes of someone who had been running assessments since the moment this went wrong and hadn't stopped yet. Go back, not asking, but begging. Flat and certain, like a woman used to being listened to. Just go. James dropped to one knee beside her, looked at the ankle. Looked at the incline behind her where she'd clearly come down the wrong way, caught a rock, gone over hard. But, I'm aware, her voice had a rasp to it from the smoke, which is exactly why you need to leave. You're wasting time. Can you walk? No, then we're not arguing about this. She stared at him, running some kind of internal calculation he wasn't privy to. You don't know me, don't need to. You could die out here carrying me. Maybe he pulled the soaked jacket off his own shoulders and draped it over her head and upper body. I'm not leaving you. So let's figure out the fast way. Something moved through her expression. Not gratitude. It was too complicated for gratitude. Then closer to the look of a person who has been operating alone for long enough that being helped feels structurally disorienting. Lorraine. She said it like she was deciding to, James. He slid one arm under her knees, one behind her back. This is going to hurt, I know. He lifted. She didn't make a sound. Bit down on something internal and held it there. Her jaw tight, her grip on his shoulder immediate and strong. Lighter than he expected and heavier than he expected in the same moment. The physics of carrying a person being nothing like any other kind of weight. He turned back the way he'd come. The fire had moved. 8 minutes he'd been inside the canyon. It had jumped the natural break on the eastern side and was now running along both walls of the trail section he needed. The air shimmered visibly. I could see maybe 15 feet ahead before the smoke closed like a curtain. Left, she said. Her mouth was close to his ear. There's a clearing about 40 yards on the left. Less fuel. It thinned out when the surveying team cut through 2 summers ago. He looked. Couldn't see anything through the haze. Trust me, she said. I've been hiking this ridge for 3 years. He went left. She was right. Oak thinned slightly. The heat was still there, but not the direct roasting proximity of the treetop fire. He could see 20 feet. Then 30. You know this area, he said. Not a question, better than I should, something compressed in how she said it. Like there was a whole conversation living inside those 4 words that she wasn't ready to have yet. He didn't push, he walked. They were stopped by fire once before the ravine. 15 minutes. Crouched behind a granite overhang that pushed out from the eastern wall, the soaked jacket spread between them, the air hot enough to make breathing its own kind of work. James watched the flames moving on the opposite side of the trail and tried to think about anything, other than the fact that he'd made a genuinely catastrophic decision and left a 7-year-old boy's father standing in a fire. Noah was at Sandra's until 6, safe, completely unaware, which meant there was no one waiting for James to not come home yet, which was either a terrible thought or a useful one. He hadn't decided. You have a son, she wasn't asking. She'd heard it in his voice when he said it before, that particular frequency that fathers carry without knowing. 7 years old, he kept his eyes on the fire line, watching for the shift in wind direction that would tell him they could move. James, Noah, the fire crackled. Something structural collapsed somewhere above them. The pop and crash of a burning tree coming down. Is that why you came back? She asked. The sun? He thought about it. Really thought, rather than reaching for the automatic answer. It's why I could explain it after, he said finally. It's not why I stopped the truck. He paused. I stopped the truck because I heard you. And then I couldn't figure out how to keep driving. Liked for a long time. Then, most people figure that out pretty easily. I know. He watched the fire shift. The wind was moving. He could see it in the smoke, starting to draw northeast, pulling the flame direction with it. But most people. It's been mentioned, the heat lessened. Not from unbearable to comfortable, but from one threshold to another. He watched the fire begin to pull away from their position, like drawn toward the upper canyon wall instead of across their path. Okay, he said. Now, he lifted her again. She held on without being asked. They moved. The access road appeared through the smoke like something he'd invented. His truck laid exactly where he'd left it. The firefighter line had advanced further down the road while he was inside. They'd moved their position, which meant they were managing the lower boundary, which meant this section was considered cleared. They set her down in the passenger seat. His hands were shaking. He noticed this with a kind of detached interest, the way you notice something that doesn't belong to you. Leftover adrenaline with nowhere to go. At the door frame until it passed. She was watching him. Hospital, she said. Hospital, he agreed. He got in, started the engine. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes of the drive. There wasn't anything obvious to say. They're both alive, and that fact was still loud enough to fill the cab. The emergency room at Ashford Regional was organized chaos. 3 other evacuees from the canyon. A crew of volunteer firefighters being checked for smoke inhalation. Us moving between curtained bays with the efficiency of someone who had stopped being surprised by Tuesdays. They triaged Lorraine immediately. The ankle, the temple wound, the smoke exposure held her back. Through the double doors on a wheelchair, James sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area and held a cup of terrible coffee with both hands and didn't call Noah for 23 minutes. Not because he forgot, because he needed to sit with the shaking hands until they stopped, and he didn't want Noah to hear whatever was still in his voice. When he finally called, Sandra picked up on the second ring. He's fine. Voice was flat with its own particular worry, the kind she used when she'd seen the news and had been managing her own fear for hours without anyone to talk to about it. He's right here. You okay? I'm okay. You were up there? I was on my way out when it got going. I'm at the hospital, but I'm fine. He stopped. Can I talk to him? A pause. Then Noah's voice, slightly too loud the way he always was on the phone. I saw the fire on the news. Hayes Patterson showed us on the classroom TV. James closed his eyes. I'm fine, bud. I'm at the hospital, but nothing happened to me. Why are you at the hospital if nothing happened? I helped someone who got hurt. Silence. Then, devastating 7-year-old precision. Did you go back in? James didn't answer immediately. I heard someone who needed help. Another silence. Different texture. Mom's making a face at me, Noah reported. As I should ask if you were really okay or just okay, despite everything. Despite the shaking hands and the smoke still in his hair, and the plastic chair and the terrible coffee. James laughed. Tell her both. Both are true. Okay. A pause. I'm home soon? Yeah, bud, I'll be there. He hung up. Sat for another few minutes. Then a doctor came out and said the woman from the canyon was asking for him. He hadn't known her name until that moment, Lorraine Mitchell. Over, on the walk down the hallway. Specific. Not something you made up. It had weight to it, the kind of name that belonged to someone who had actually been somewhere and done actual things. She was in the last bay, leg elevated, ankle wrapped in a temporary brace pending imaging. The temple wound cleaned and sealed with a small row of steri-strips. She looked better and worse simultaneously. Cleaner. The smoke and adrenaline had been covering something that now sat plainly on her face. Exhaustion. Something underneath the exhaustion that ran deeper than one bad afternoon. Sit, gestured to the chair beside the bed with the authority of someone used to running meetings. He sat, a beat of silence. The kind where both people know something is about to be said and neither is quite ready yet. Reached under the thin hospital pillow and pulled out a small notebook. Black cover. One corner burned away, the edges brown and curled, the rest intact. She set it on the blanket between them. I need to tell you something, she said. It changes what happened today. So I need you to actually hear it, not just listen to it. James looked at the notebook, then at her. Okay, that fire wasn't an accident. The words landed flat and specific, like a tool being set on a workbench. Didn't say anything for a moment. Processed the sentence as a literal statement. Turned it over. Looked at the burned corner of the notebook. You're serious? Completely. She opened it. The pages inside were intact, dense with handwriting, numbers, notations, dates. I've been investigating a development project. Summit Ridge Development. They're building a luxury resort on protected land up in Cascade Ridge. High-end private lots. The kind of thing that looks like economic development from a distance. She tapped one of the pages. But the land surveys are fraudulent. Environmental impact reports were falsified. A wetland area on the eastern section. Federally protected, that in Summit Ridge's documentation simply doesn't exist. They redrew the maps, hired consultants to reclassify it. They've been bribing state inspectors to rubber stamp permits that should never have been approved. James sat with this for a moment. How much money, between the inflated land values, the illegal lot divisions, and the environmental shortcuts? Owes the notebook, 50 million at minimum, probably more. Who's behind it? Victor Bryant. Like she said the name the way people say names they've been carrying internally for months, with the weariness of someone who has been fighting something invisible and finally has to make it audible. CEO of Summit Ridge, has connections through this entire region. Local government, State Environmental Commission, Federal Permitting Office. I don't know how deep it goes. That's the problem. I don't know who to trust inside the system. But going up there yourself. I'd found a location to store the physical documents, survey records that don't match the county files, photographs showing the wetland pre-development, paper evidence that can't be dismissed as a data error. Looked at the notebook. I was up there collecting the last of it when the fire started. I was moving too fast on the descent, missed a step on the loose section near the eastern wall, and went down hard. James looked at her ankle. They were watching you, he said. She met his eyes. Yes, someone followed you up there and started the fire to destroy whatever you'd collected, and to ensure I didn't make it out with it. She said it without melodrama, somehow worse than if she'd reached for drama. The documents I was carrying are gone, but there's more. In a metal storage box I secured before the fire started. I didn't have time to retrieve it. James sat back, looked at the ceiling for a moment. You want to go back up? I have to. You have a severely sprained ankle. Severe sprain, not broken. There's a difference. She held his gaze. I can't do it alone. The terrain is rough enough when you're healthy. A crutch. I need someone who knows the trail. A pause. You know the trail. He was aware, somewhere in his chest, of a feeling he recognized from the moment he'd stopped the truck. Not bravery, not elevated moral clarity. Just the stubborn recognition that some things are going to happen regardless of whether they make sense on paper. This is dangerous, he said. Yes, these people set a fire. Yes, to kill you. She didn't flinch. Possibly to kill the evidence, but arrogant enough to be certain I was the primary target. But yes, the effect would have been the same. He thought about Noah, about Sandra's flat-voiced worry on the phone, less about the way Noah had said, come home soon with that particular child seriousness that meant it wasn't a request. He thought about the chemical smell in the fire, the thing that hadn't belonged in natural terrain burning naturally. The box, he said. How confident are you it's still there? It's metal. The location was partially sheltered. If the fire moved the direction it was heading when I went down, there's a reasonable chance. When do you want to go? She blinked. He'd surprised her. Tomorrow morning? before they have a chance to search the site. The fire crews will be managing containment, not doing detailed searches of the interior. Okay, you're saying yes, I'm saying okay. There's a difference. Something shifted in her expression. Not the complicated layered thing from the canyon, but something more direct. The specific look of a person who doesn't get helped often enough to be practiced at receiving it gracefully. Don't know me, she said again. Same words as before. Different weight anymore. Something closer to a question. Already established that, James stood. What kind of company? She tilted her head a fraction. Sharp even now. How did you know I run a company? Because you said you don't know who to trust inside the system. But you knew the terrain. And you knew where the wetland was. He looked at the notebook. You weren't just investigating as a private citizen. It had a professional reason to be in that canyon. A long pause, clean energy. Solar, wind, battery storage. Mitchell Clean Energy. Based out of Richmond, she watched him. We were bidding on the power contract for the resort. A team went up to survey the site. They came back with questions. The acreage didn't match what Summit Ridge claimed. The environmental assessments looked rushed. I started asking questions. She looked at the ceiling. That was 14 months ago. Now someone's trying to kill you. And now someone tried to destroy the evidence. She looked back at him. I don't know that I was the intended target. I want to be precise about that, noted. He picked up his jacket. Rest tonight. At the trailhead at 7 tomorrow. Text me your number and I'll confirm. She looked at him for a long moment. Why? She'll question. Not rhetorical. James thought about the chemical smell, out the notebook with its burned corner, about $50 million and falsified maps, and a wetland that officially didn't exist anymore, because someone set that fire on purpose, he said. And I was in it. He pulled the jacket over his arm. Left makes it my business, whether I like it or not. He left before she could respond. Noah was already in pajamas when James got back, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal. Sandra had fed him dinner at 5:30, and this was apparently a second cereal. Negotiation James had clearly missed and which Noah had won in his absence. He looked up when James came through the door. Really looked, the way children look when they're deciding whether to be worried or not. You smell like outside, Noah said. I was outside, like the bad outside. Like burning outside. James sat down across from him. Yeah, there was a fire. Noah chewed cereal, slowly processing. Did you help the person? Yes. Are they okay? They're at the hospital? They're going to be fine. James looked at his son for a moment. The bowl of cereal, the pajamas with the small rocket ships on them. The way Noah held the spoon, slightly wrong. A habit James had given up correcting 2 years ago, because some battles are not worth having. I'm going back up tomorrow morning. To help with something, Noah stopped chewing. Don't look at me like that. I'm not looking at you like anything. Making the face. What face? The face you make when you're calculating whether to tell me not to do something or whether it's not going to work anyway. Noah considered this with apparent seriousness. Set the spoon down. Will you be careful? Yes. Real careful or regular careful? What's the difference? Regular careful is like you're wearing your work boots. Real careful is like you're paying actual attention. Looked at his son and felt something he had no precise word for. Pride adjacent, love adjacent, like specific to this particular 7-year-old who had apparently developed a taxonomy of caution during the months James had been too tired to notice. Real careful, James said. Noah picked up the spoon again. Okay, a pause, like the cereal from the good box. Sandra got the different kind. I'll get the good box, promise? Promise. Noah nodded, satisfied, and resumed eating. James sat there a moment longer, watched his son, then got up and went to the shower to wash the smoke out. The trailhead was quiet at 7 in the morning. The fire had burned itself into a holding pattern overnight. Crews had established a containment line. The eastern corridor was no longer actively burning, but the access road was still technically closed to civilians. James had parked the truck a quarter-mile down the service road and walked to the trailhead through a field that smelled like cold ash. Lorraine was already there, leaning against a rental car with one forearm crutch tucked under her right arm, not the full pair he'd expected. She'd traded the hospital gown for dark work pants, a long-sleeved shirt, boots with the right ankle laced looser than the left, hair pulled back, The burned notebook in a small crossbody bag. You actually came, she said when he arrived. Said I would. People say things, I've noticed. He looked at the single crutch. Just one? The ankle is stable enough for lateral movement if I'm careful. The crutch is for anything steep. She shifted her weight, demonstrating. I've had worse, when? A pause. That's a longer conversation. They started up the trail. Onion looked different in the aftermath. Not destroyed exactly, but altered in the way that anything altered past a certain point stops looking like itself. The familiar shapes were still there, rock formations and the trail edges, and the split in the path he always told Noah to take right. But everything was covered in a uniform gray-black that flattened the landscape, removed its texture. Those still glowed orange in the hollows of fallen logs. The air was cold and tasted like the inside of a chimney. James watched the ground and the perimeter both. The instinct from yesterday hadn't quieted. Tell me about Bryant, he said, not to fill silence, because he was thinking and thinking out loud helped him organize it. Victor Bryant. She navigated a section of loose debris without losing the rhythm of the crutch. 61 years old. Ike built Summit Ridge development over 20 years, started with commercial real estate in the Richmond corridor, moved into resort development about 12 years ago. He's well liked. That's the first thing you have to understand. Dives to the right foundations, shows up at the right events, has the kind of reputation that accumulates over decades and becomes its own kind of armor. But his financing structure is opaque in a way that legitimate developers don't usually tolerate. I've been trying to trace the ownership chain for 8 months and I keep hitting walls. Shell company to shell company, Delaware to Nevada, as perfectly legal on paper and completely impenetrable in practice. James moved a burned branch off the path. And there's a reporter. She glanced at him sideways. You mentioned someone was digging into Summit Ridge independently, he said. That's not a guess, that's a tell. Someone reached out to you after you started making noise, or you reached out to them. Either way, there's a journalist. Because that's how these things work when you can't go to law enforcement. A long pause. Ian Brooks, she said. He covers environmental and land use issues for the state paper. He contacted me 3 months ago. He'd been pulling public filings on Summit Ridge and had the same questions about the financing structure and cautious about how much we share with each other. He has his own sourcing to protect. Is he close to publishing? He says he needs more. What I have in the box, if it survived, might be enough to change that. Reached the section of trail where Lorraine had fallen. He could see it now in daylight, the loose section where stone gave way to gravel and the grade steepened unexpectedly. An easy place to miss a step in a hurry. She slowed, looked at it. Something passed across her face, not fear, but the expression of a person mentally replaying a moment they'd rather not revisit it. They went right along the wall. 20 minutes further in, she stopped, looked at a cluster of burned trees. Right there, the storage box was tucked into the base of a rock formation, half hidden by a fall of scorched debris. Military-grade metal by the look of it. The exterior was heat-blackened and the corners had warped slightly, but the lid lock held. Lorraine produced a key from the inside pocket of her bag. She opened it inside. A stacked set of folders in plastic sleeves, sealed, 3 USB drives in a small mesh pouch, a manila envelope thick with photographs also sealed, all intact. Let out one breath. Controlled. But James had been watching her for less than 24 hours, and he already knew that one controlled breath from this woman was the equivalent of anyone else's visible relief. Loaded everything carefully into the pack he'd brought, redistributed the weight, then he heard them. Voices. Below. Coming up the main trail. Not emergency crew voices, not the radio-clipped efficiency of fire management. Conversation voices. Like people moving without particular urgency, as if they had every reason to be there. He put one hand on Lorraine's arm. She went still immediately. They moved behind a section of fallen trunk and stayed low. James watched through a gap in the burned brush. 2 men, dark clothing, both carrying radios, not orange and yellow fire department equipment. Moving slowly, scanning the terrain. Boss wants to make sure she didn't have a cache up here. Place was flat, professional. Fire should have handled most of it. Most of it, if she had anything in a container, then we find it. Or we don't and we deal with that after. They moved through the clearing on the lower section, shaped it visually, and continued up the alternate path, not the route James and Lorraine had taken. James watched until they were out of sight. Then he looked at her. Her face had gone very still. Not afraid, past afraid, to something colder and more focused than fear. "We need to go," she said. Quiet, precise now. The other way down they moved. They didn't speak until they reached the truck, both of them standing in the field, breathing hard from the pace, the pack on James's back, ash on both their shoes. The morning sky had gone from gray to pale blue. Somewhere down the service road, Buck was running. "They were there looking for what we just took," she said. "Yes, which means they know I survived. And they know I would have tried to recover evidence." "Yes." She looked at the pack, at him. Anything had shifted in the arithmetic behind her eyes, recalculated, arrived at a new number. "This is more dangerous than I represented to you," she said. James put the pack in the truck bed. "I had a general sense," James waited until he looked at her. "These people burned 800 acres of protected land. They are not going to stop because a reporter files a story. They're going to look for every piece of this, the documents, the source of custody. Anyone associated with it." He held her gaze. "You saying you want me to walk away?" A pause. "I'm saying I want you to understand what you're walking into before you take another step." He thought about it. Genuinely, late, standing in a field that smelled like ash at 7:40 in the morning, with a pack full of evidence against a well-connected developer, and two of that developer's people actively searching the canyon above them. He thought about Noah. Real careful versus regular careful. About the chemical smell in the fire that still hadn't left his memory. "Where's safe to take this?" he asked. She considered. "My apartment. I need to organize what we have before anything else." "Okay." On the truck. Looked at her through the window. "Get in." She got in. They drove back down the mountain in the thin morning light. Behind them, somewhere in the burned canyon, our men in dark clothing were still searching for something they were not going to find. The metal box was in James Carter's truck, and something that had started as a single afternoon's decision. 40 seconds on a gravel shoulder, one man who couldn't figure out how to keep driving, had become something else entirely now. Not a rescue. A reckoning. Lorraine's apartment was on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse building in the Ashford Arts District. Exposed brick, high ceilings, windows that should have been replaced a decade ago, but had been left because they were original, and original meant something to the right buyer. The apartment itself was not what James expected, not something that announced itself or performed success at the doorway. Instead, books stacked on every flat surface, organized by some system he couldn't immediately decode. Working maps on the walls, annotated, pinned, oak sections circled in red marker, a kitchen counter with 3 half-finished cups of coffee in various stages of cold, a window that looked east toward the ridge, and through it, just barely visible on the horizon, darker smudge where the fire had been. She looked at the apartment through his eyes. Something briefly self-conscious in her expression. "I wasn't expecting company." "It's fine." He set the pack on the kitchen table. "You want to start?" And that was when Lorraine Mitchell did something James Carter would not have predicted. She stopped moving, not dramatically, not with visible distress. She simply stood beside the table, with her hand on the pack's strap, and went still, and the exhaustion from the hospital bay, the thing the adrenaline had been covering, came to the surface and stayed there. "I have been doing this for 14 months, she said, quiet. To the room more than to him. 14 months of being careful and building the case and not making any move I couldn't walk back from if I needed to. She looked at the pack. "Yesterday someone burned 800 acres to stop me." James didn't say anything. Let it land, which means they were watching me the whole time. She pulled the pack toward her, started opening it. Hands moving again, back to work. Work was apparently how she processed every careful move I made, every boundary I set. They saw it all and waited for the moment I was isolated. He started pulling folders from the pack, laying them on the table. "Tell anyone you were going up?" "No, I've kept this completely separate from the company's activities. No paper trail connecting Mitchell Clean Energy to this investigation." She spread the first folder open. "I went alone. Lead came from somewhere else." James looked at the aerial photographs. The wetland, clear and unmistakable. drainage patterns and vegetation density that no legitimate environmental consultant could have confused for seasonal runoff. Someone at Summit Ridge knew you were going up there. They'd been physically tracking you, or they have someone close to you. She looked up from the folders. I'm not saying that to scare you, he said. I'm saying it because it changes how we handle the next steps. Jake absorbed this, straight to processing, the same way she'd absorbed the news that carrying her out of the fire might kill him. Not denial, not panic. Just the immediate question of what to do with the information. The commissioner's office, it's a slokeless. 3 weeks ago I called Hayes's office. I didn't identify myself specifically. I said I was a private citizen with environmental concerns about the Summit Ridge project and asked about the review process. She looked at the table. My company also filed a formal objection to the permitting 18 months ago. My name is on that filing, so Summit Ridge knows who you are professionally. They knew who I was professionally. The investigation is the part I kept separate. Objection filing was enough to put me on a watch list. She looked at the photographs spread between them. These are going to change things. When do you want to approach Hayes? Her expression shifted. Quick, decisive. I went to see him. Evening. After the hospital, James looked at her steadily. Yesterday evening, yes, while I was at home. Yes. She met his eyes and didn't look away. I didn't tell you, because I thought a direct approach, with the preliminary documents, with my professional credentials, would be enough to start an official inquiry. That if there was an active state-level investigation, I'd provide protection. Make us harder to pressure. What did he say? She was quiet for a moment. He implied that my company's failed bid on the Summit Ridge power contract gave me a financial motive to fabricate concerns. Suggested I file a formal complaint and go through proper channels. He suggested it in the way that people suggest things they have no intention of acting on. James sat down. Let the weight of it settle. You went to him alone. Told him you have documentation. I implied it, Lorraine. He looked at her steadily. You told Malcolm Hayes, who is either incompetent or compromised, either of those options is acceptable, that you have physical evidence of Summit Ridge's fraud. And then you came home. She held his gaze. And this morning my office was broken into. When did you find out? Called me 40 minutes ago. Building manager found the door forced. They took the laptop. The backup drive, she gestured at the table. Everything here was with me. They don't know that. James sat with this for a long moment. The picture was clarifying rapidly, and the picture was not good. Hayes had made a call. Someone had made a decision. And the window between those decisions and the break-in was measured in hours, not days. Here's what we do, he said. Don't go back to Hayes. We don't go to anyone local. You trust Daniel Brooks? How much? Professionally. He's careful. He fact-checks. He's protected sources before in situations where the pressure to give them up was real. Call him tonight. Show him what's in those folders. James looked at the photographs, at the annotated maps, at the careful months of documentation spread across Lorraine Mitchell's kitchen table. Hayes made a call to someone after you left his office last night. Like you don't have weeks. You might have days. She looked at the documents, at the window with its view of the burned ridge, then she looked at him. Why are you still here? Not hostile. Genuine. She actually wanted to know. James thought about Noah. About the face across the cereal bowl this morning. Real careful or regular careful. And the taxonomy of caution that a 7-year-old had apparently been building quietly while his father was too tired to notice. About the 2 men on the trail. About the professional flatness in the voice that had said, "Boss wants to make sure she didn't have a cash up here." The casual confidence of people who expected not to face resistance, as they had done this before. Because they operated in a world where people saw something wrong and drove away. Because I was in that fire, James said. And it wasn't an accident. I've got a kid who's going to ask me someday what I did when I found that out. He looked at her. That's the honest answer. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Daniel Brooks. Daniel answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting for her call, which meant he already knew something had happened. He'd been monitoring emergency channels as part of his ongoing coverage. He'd seen the evacuation order, acreage estimates, the early reports that the cause was under investigation. He'd put it together when Lorraine's name didn't appear in any casualty or witness reports, and she hadn't answered her phone for 12 hours. "Are you okay?" Functional. She had the phone on speaker, folders open in front of her. "Daniel, I have everything. Physical documentation. Survey records that contradict Summit Ridge's filed maps by a margin that cannot be explained as error. Environmental photographs. Inspector sign-off records cross-referenced with payment evidence." She paused. "Someone set that fire deliberately. And last night my office was broken into." Silence on the line then. "How confident are you on the fire?" "Tell him about the accelerant," James said. Lorraine looked at him. "There's someone here, James Carter, the person who got me out of the canyon. He's in construction, not involved in the investigation." Noticed something in the fire's characteristics. "What did you notice?" Daniel's voice, directed toward James now. "The smell was wrong," James said. "I've hiked that ridge for 3 years. I know what a natural fire smells like in that terrain. There was a chemical underneath it. Petroleum-based, not wood smoke. It was there in the first section, where the fire started, and it thinned out as I moved further in. You'd testify to that?" It came to that. "Okay," the sound of Daniel processing, keyboard in the background. "I need to see what you have. In person, tonight if possible. Because I've been sitting on something for 3 weeks that I haven't published because I didn't have enough corroboration." Lorraine looked at James. "What have you got?" she asked. "Victor Bryant's board connections," Daniel said. "Specifically his relationship with 4 members of the State Environmental Review Commission, channeled through non-profit foundations he either founded or controls. It's not direct bribery, it's more elegant than that. Appointment influence, station routing, the kind of structure that's legal on paper and functionally a network of controlled decision-makers. Your documentation plus my financial mapping, together that's a story that's hard to dismiss. How long to publish? Have is what you say it is, days. Not weeks." She looked at James. He nodded once. "We'll meet you tonight," she said. "Text me where." She ended the call. "Set the phone down. It's happening fast," James said. "It has to." Looked at him steadily. "They know I'm still moving. The next thing they try won't be property." He absorbed this. "Noah's at his mother's until Friday. He's safe there." She nodded. Looked at the table. "Then, won't have to be part of the meeting with Daniel. What you've already done. I'll be there." She looked up. "I'll be at the meeting," he said, simply. The way he'd said not a chance in the canyon, with the fire 30 yards away. Like some decisions weren't complicated, they were just decisions. She didn't thank him. He was starting to understand she wouldn't. Instead, she turned back to the documents, pulled the nearest folder, and started to work. James moved to the other side of the table, picked up a folder, opened it. Outside, the ridge sat quiet under its layer of ash. The fire was contained, the evidence was on the table, and somewhere in this city, a network of connections built over 20 years, a man named Victor Bryant was making calls and waiting for news. He was going to be waiting for a while. Daniel Brooks picked the kind of diner that doesn't try to be anything. Vinyl booths, laminated menus with photographs of the food, which always meant the food was better than it looked, because nothing ever looked good laminated. A counter with 6 stools, 4 of them occupied by people who'd clearly been coming here long enough that the staff didn't need to ask. Next, coffee that arrived before you ordered it, because you were the kind of person who came to this diner at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, and that kind of person drank coffee. James slid into the booth across from Daniel Brooks and understood immediately that the man was younger than his byline suggested. 31, maybe 32, wire-rimmed glasses, nervous energy of someone who spent most of his working hours sitting still and processing information and had not yet found a physical outlet for what that built up. His leg moved under the table. James could feel it through the booth frame. He laid a tablet face down in front of him and a legal pad covered in handwriting, so compressed it looked like a different alphabet. "You drove separately," Daniel said when they sat down. "Not a question. An observation. In watching the parking lot. Force of habit," Lorraine said. "Good habit." He flipped the tablet over, turned it to face them. 6 months ago, I started pulling public records on Summit Ridge, and as a routine piece, new resort development, jobs, local economic impact. But the permit timeline didn't make sense. He tapped the screen. Environmental review for a project this size typically takes 18 to 24 months. It Ridge got cleared in 11, which isn't impossible, but it's unusual enough that I started asking questions. James looked at the tablet. Permit dates were annotated in a color that matched nothing else on the screen. Daniel's own system, meaningful only to him. Who signed off? Lorraine asked. State Environmental Commission. 3 signatures required at the final stage. Like this, all 3 granted within a 4-day window. Daniel pulled the tablet back, scrolled. One of those signatures belongs to a commissioner who had publicly objected to a smaller Summit Ridge project 2 years earlier on wetland grounds. The commissioner did a complete reversal for this one. Malcolm Hayes, Lorraine said. Daniel looked at her. You already knew. I knew he was compromised. I didn't know the timeline. Hayes reversed his position 14 months ago, months after he joined the board of a non-profit foundation called the Virginia Land Stewardship Initiative. Daniel set the tablet down, which was established 18 months ago. Funded primarily by a holding company registered in Nevada called Blue Ridge Heritage Partners, which shares a registered agent with 4 other holding companies. He paused. All of which trace back to the same corporate law firm in Richmond that handles Summit Ridge's development contracts. The diner hummed around them. Someone at the counter laughed at something. The coffee arrived. Looked at the paper trail on the tablet. The money didn't move fast or obvious. It moved the way water moved through limestone, finding the path of least resistance, leaving no dramatic marks, arriving exactly where it intended. Built this over years, James said. Victor Bryant has been running this structure for at least a decade. Daniel folded his hands on the table. The Virginia Land Stewardship Initiative is just the local version. I found similar structures in 2 other states where Bryant has developed projects. Same pattern every time. Establish a foundation. Recruit the key regulatory decision-makers onto the board. Create a relationship that looks like civic engagement. Picked up his coffee. By the time you need a favor, it doesn't feel like a favor anymore. It feels like professional courtesy between people who share values. Lorraine had the manila envelope open. Legal photographs spread on the table beside Daniel's tablet. This is the wetland area on the eastern section of the Cascade Ridge property. Dated 18 months ago, before Summit Ridge began any site preparation. Looked at them carefully. Did not touch them. These contradict the environmental assessment. The assessment says this area is seasonal drainage. Insufficient water table to qualify as protected wetland. She tapped one photograph. It's taken in late August, driest month of the year in this region. There is standing water 6 inches deep across 40 acres. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I need to run this past my editor. And legal. We publish something like this. Summit Ridge will come at us hard. I need everything airtight. How long? If this documentation checks out the way I think it will? He looked at the photographs. 4 days. Maybe 3. Lorraine looked at James. James looked at the photographs. Of the standing water in the driest month. At the 40 acres that officially didn't exist. 3 days, he said to Daniel. Not 4. Daniel looked at him. You know something I don't? Someone broke into her office last night. They were sitting on this. He kept his voice even. They didn't get what they were looking for. Which means they know they didn't get it, which means they're still looking. 3 days. Daniel nodded slowly. 3 days. Worked for another 2 hours. James mostly listened, understood construction and materials, and the physics of land development, in a way that turned out to be occasionally useful. When Lorraine talked about the drainage impact of covering a 40-acre wetland with resort infrastructure, James could visualize the concrete and the grading and the water table consequences in a way that helped him ask questions that tightened the story. Daniel noticed this, glanced at James once with the expression of someone updating a prior assumption. They left the diner at 11, walked to their separate cars in the parking lot. Cold night. The ridge was invisible from here, but James knew which direction it was. Go home, Lorraine said. Check on Noah. He's at Sandra's. So call him. She had the bag over her shoulder, the documents secured. We're not meeting again until Daniel calls. Nothing to do right now except wait and not do anything stupid. James looked at her. That aimed at anyone in particular. At both of us. She met his eyes. Alertness behind hers had settled into something steadier, Not confidence exactly, but something earned rather than assumed. I make decisions faster than I should sometimes. You probably already noticed, haze, flat, owning it. I thought speed was a form of protection. Go before they know you're moving, she shifted the bag. I miscalculated. He didn't argue with the assessment. She already knew it was true. Get some sleep, he said. You too, ate in the rental car, paused before closing the door, James. For what it's worth, I don't usually do this. Do what? She gestured vaguely at the diner, at the documents, a general situation of two people standing in a parking lot at 11, at night after 2 days that had started with a wildfire. Work with someone I met 12 hours ago. Neither do I know. She looked at him for a moment. That makes it more, not less. She closed the door. He stood in the parking lot until her taillights turned onto the main road. Then he drove home, made coffee he didn't need, daily, sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, thinking about shell companies and permit timelines and a man named Victor Bryant, who had spent a decade building himself a world where consequences happened to other people. He didn't sleep much. What sleep he got was clean and without dreams. 3 days passed with the specific texture of waiting when you know something is coming and cannot hurry it. James went to work. He had a framing project on the east side of town, a commercial renovation, 3 weeks in, kind of steady mid-sized job that paid consistently and required enough concentration to occupy the part of his brain that wanted to spin. He swung a hammer, made decisions about load-bearing walls, drank bad coffee from a thermos, and talked to his crew about football because that was what you talked about when you didn't want to talk about anything real. He called Noah every evening, took the calls outside, leaning against the truck, watching the sky go dark over the ridge. Bah, did you know that some trees actually need fire to reproduce? Noah's voice had the particular excitement of someone who had recently acquired information and had not yet had enough opportunity to deploy it. Mrs. Patterson said, "Their seeds won't even open unless they get burned first." I didn't know that. It's called serotonin. The seed has a resin coating that melts in the heat, and then the seed falls and grows. A pause. Mrs. Patterson said it's like how some good things need something hard to happen first before they can start. James was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Patterson's smart. She's okay. She assigns too much reading. Noah's priority hierarchy clearly established. Are you okay, Ba? You sound like you're outside. I am outside. Why? Sometimes outside is where I think better. If Noah considered this, I think better in the bathtub. With the door closed, then we're different thinkers. Is that okay? That's perfect. He could hear Noah smiling through the phone, like particular frequency. Unmistakable, unphotographable, the exact sound James Carter would have walked back through any amount of fire to keep hearing. Come get me Friday, Noah asked. Friday. Promise. Real promise or real promise. Lorraine texted on Thursday afternoon. One line, Daniel says tomorrow. 8 p.m. James read it twice, picked up the hammer. One more day. The article went live at 8:03 on a Friday evening. They were in Lorraine's apartment when it happened. The same apartment, but changed by 48 hours of Lorraine being systematically unable to stay still. The books had migrated. The maps had acquired additional annotations in red. Like 7 half-drunk cups of coffee were distributed across various surfaces at varying temperatures. Daniel had called at 7:50 to say it was going up. Ice carried the particular controlled energy of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that good journalism didn't always feel good. But this one did. This one felt like the right kind of damage. Lorraine had her laptop open, like James sat beside her, not touching, just there. A3, luxury, resort, poisoned ground. How Summit Ridge Development built an empire on falsified land and bought the officials who let them. The headline took up the full width of the page. The photographs, the wetland in August. The survey maps side by side showing the discrepancy, the permit timeline annotated with the financial connections to the non-profit structure. Daniel's writing was precise and restrained, made it more devastating if he'd reached for drama. Just facts. Just the numbers. Like just the sequence of decisions that added up to a man named Victor Bryant, operating for a decade in a regulatory environment he had carefully constructed to be his own. The comments started within minutes. Then the shares. Then. And this was the shift James watched happen in real time. The other journalists. A reporter from the National Wire Service posting a link. A political reporter noting that two of the officials named had contested elections coming up. Environmental law professor in Richmond calling the wetland reclassification one of the most brazen regulatory violations he'd seen documented in 20 years. By 9:15, it was on cable news. By 9:45, Virginia EPA had issued a statement saying they were aware of the reporting and would have more to say in the morning. Lorraine sat with her hands folded on the table and watched the screen and did not celebrate. James watched her not celebrate. "I thought it would feel different," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I thought it would feel finished." She looked at the screen. "It doesn't feel finished, because it isn't." "No," she turned, looked at him directly. "Aunt hasn't responded yet. It's been 45 minutes. He knew this was coming, or suspected. They've been trying to find and destroy the evidence for 4 days. Which means his response is already prepared. He's waiting for the right moment." Look back at the screen. "What I don't know is what form it takes." James looked at the article, at the names, at the documentation laid out in public, undeniable, moving through the internet at a speed that no injunction could outrun. "Lost the narrative," James said. "That's already done. Whatever he does next, he's responding to this, not controlling it." "Yes," she folded her hands. "But responding doesn't mean surrendering." He stayed until midnight. They talked, not only about the story, but about her company, the projects she'd built over 12 years, from a 3-person startup in a Richmond office that was technically a converted garage. About the solar work in particular, she talked about it, with the energy of someone who had found their actual thing, not just a successful career, but the work they were meant to be doing. He talked about construction, about the thing he liked in framing, the moment when the skeleton of a building became visible, before the walls went up, when you could see the logic of it, the way it was engineered to stand. "The hidden architecture, that's what you were doing," Buck said, "in the canyon." Looking at the hidden architecture, he thought about it. The chemical smell, yes. Most people would have filed it away as irrelevant. Background noise. She looked at him. "You kept it, Habit," he said. "Something doesn't fit the pattern, you don't dismiss it. You set it aside and wait to understand it. That's good thinking. That's construction. If you ignore what doesn't fit in a structure, eventually the structure tells you about it the hard way." She laughed. First real laugh he'd heard from her. Not polite, not managed, but actual and spontaneous. A half-second of pure amusement before she brought it back. The best sound he'd heard all week. He left at 12:15. Drove home through empty streets. Checked his phone on the driveway. 17 news alerts about the Summit Ridge story. Nothing from Lorraine, nothing from Daniel, nothing from Noah, which meant everything was fine in Sandra's house, and a 7-year-old was sleeping without knowing his father had spent the week helping expose a multi-million-dollar fraud operation. James went inside, set the alarm for 6, lay down on his bed. His phone rang at 6:14. He was already half awake. Picked it up. "Lorraine, we have a problem." He sat up. "What kind?" "My apartment." "Someone's here," not panicked, controlled but barely. The edge that happens when control is doing real work. "I heard glass break. I'm in the back room. I can hear them in the front." He was already moving. Feet on the floor, shoes, keys. "Get to the bathroom. Lock it. Stay on the phone, James." "Oh, the phone, Lorraine." He drove fast. Too fast. Ran 2 red lights in a section of the city that was still mostly empty at 6:20 in the morning. 20 minutes in normal traffic. He made it in 11. The building looked normal from the street. No police. No movement in the lobby. He took the stairs because waiting for the elevator would have taken 3 seconds longer than he was willing to wait. Her apartment door was open, not the way a door is open when someone goes to get the mail, but open at an angle. The frame splintered at the lock plate. He went in the front room, wrecked. Not just searched, wrecked. A specific violence of people who want to send a message alongside their search. Books pulled from shelves. The kitchen counter cleared in one sweep. The annotated maps, months of accumulated field notation, torn from the walls. "Lorraine." Nothing. "Lorraine." A sound from the back. He moved through the apartment, checked the bedroom. Empty, bathroom door closed. "It's me," he said to the door. It opened. She was standing against the far wall, phone in her hand, dressed. She'd been awake already, which meant she'd barely slept, which meant she'd been sitting with the screen watching the story spread all night. Smart. Also unsustainable. But right now, smart was the relevant category. She looked at him, looked past him at what she could see of the apartment. "They're gone," she said. "Yes, just left. They didn't pass me on the stairs, which means they went out the back or the service elevator." He looked around the bathroom, intact, untouched. "They get anything?" No, her bag was on the bathroom floor beside her, documents inside. "I woke up when I heard the front window break. Grabbed the bag and came in here." She looked at the door. "I sat on the floor with my back against the tub and listened to them take apart 14 months of work." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "The originals are in that bag." "Yes. And the digital copies?" She looked at him. "Distributed. It has copies. I have an encrypted upload in a secure cloud account." And she reached into the bag, pulled out a USB drive. "The morning after the canyon, before anything else, I made 3 additional copies. This one has been in my bag since Tuesday." He exhaled. She sat down on the edge of the tub. The first moment of not standing he'd seen from her since the hospital. "They're escalating," she said. "Yes, the article went live last night. This morning they're in my apartment." She looked at her hands. "This isn't containment anymore. This is intimidation. They want me afraid enough to recant publicly. Are you considering it?" She gave him the look that answered the question. I'm considering," she said carefully, "is that the next escalation after property damage might not be property." He'd been thinking the same thing since he hit the stairs. "Noah's at Sandra's until this evening," he said. "Ike was going to pick him up at 6. Call Sandra. Tell her to keep him through the weekend." Something tightened in his chest. Not panic, but its first cousin. The specific recalibration of a parent whose threat assessment has just shifted. "Don't know about Noah. They know your name. They know you were in the canyon. Your name is in the building's visitor log from Tuesday, when you helped me carry the evidence up." She held his gaze. "They've had 4 days to be thorough," light Sandra from the hallway. She picked up on the 3rd ring, already alert. Her internal alarm for calls from James before 7 in the morning was well calibrated by 3 years of co-parenting. "Can Noah stay through the weekend?" A pause. "What's going on?" "Something I'm dealing with." "He's not involved. I just need to know he's somewhere consistent and I know where he is." Another pause. Longer. "He's fine here. He and his cousin were up until 10 playing video games. They sleep until noon anyway." A breath. "James, are you okay?" "I know. I'll explain when I can. Keep him there. And Sandra, if anyone comes to the house or to school asking about me or Noah, call me first." I talk to anyone." She was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, he's here. I've got him. Thank you." He went back into the apartment. Lorraine had stood up, looking at the wreckage of the front room with the expression of someone doing triage, assessing what was lost, what could be reconstructed, what didn't matter. "The maps," she said. "I know. 3 years of field notation. The physical marks." They stopped, breathed once. "Replaceable. It's replaceable." She turned away from it. "What's the next step?" Not a question. The way she talked when she was back in motion, declarative, forward-facing, stating the next step as an inevitability to be identified rather than a choice to be made. "We find somewhere safer than here," James said. "And we figure out where Bryant is coordinating his operation." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Man on the trail. The break-in last night at your office. The break-in this morning here, within hours of the article going live. He moved through the apartment toward the front window. Broken, glass swept inside, a quick professional entry. This isn't remote management. Someone is coordinating locally. There's a physical base somewhere. Or just competent people with phones. Competent people with phones still need somewhere to process information, store equipment, manage personnel." Looked at the street below. Ordinary Friday morning. Daniel found the real estate connections in Summit Ridge's corporate structure. Did he pull all of it? Not just the permitted properties, but the ancillary holdings. Lorraine went still, and she pulled out her phone and called Daniel. He picked up immediately. "I've been watching the analytics all night. The story is, Daniel, Summit Ridge ancillary properties. Do you have a complete list?" A pause. "I pulled the major permitted sites." "I didn't. Pull all of them. including anything held through Blue Ridge Heritage Partners or any of the affiliated holding companies. Any commercial or industrial property within 40 miles of Ashford. Looked at James. How? Fast. Hour, Daniel said. Maybe less, do it now. She ended the call. Looked at James. You think they're using a Summit Ridge property? Victor Bryant has been managing this locally for years. Couldn't use his own home or a rented space that could be traced back to him personally. But a holding company property, something that's been on the books long enough that it doesn't stand out in a search. She crossed to the kitchen, a glass of water, drank half of it standing at the sink. That's how he thinks. Everything inside a structure that looks legitimate from a distance. James looked around the wrecked apartment. Get your bag. You're not staying here, I know. Hotel. Something chain and anonymous. Nothing you've stayed at before, I know, James, and eat something. There's a gas station on 5th that has breakfast sandwiches that are terrible in a way that somehow works at 6:30 in the morning. Looked at him. Something in the look that was new. Not the professional assessment, not the exhaustion, not the controlled processing. Look at him. Something that existed only because they were two people standing in a wrecked apartment at 6:30 in the morning, and one of them had been sitting on a bathroom floor for an hour, and the other had driven through red lights to get there. James? Thank you. She said it differently from every other time she'd said it. Not transactional, not professional, just direct and unguarded. He picked up the bag for her. Gas station first, he said. Then the hotel. Daniel called at 8:47. They were in a mid-range chain hotel off the highway, the kind with a lobby that smelled like carpet cleaner and a continental breakfast that had been sitting out since 6. Anonymous. Exactly right. Lorraine had the phone on speaker. I found it, Daniel said. There's an industrial property on the east side of Ashford. Commercial warehouse space, 14,000 square feet. Held by a company called Crestline Property Holdings. Layers removed from Blue Ridge Heritage Partners, but traces back clearly once you know what to look for. A pause. Officially listed as storage for construction equipment. Created 2 years ago under Summit Ridge's general contractor license. Is it active? Utility records say yes. Electric bill for an empty storage facility is running about $400 a month. Consistent with climate control, lighting, and running electronics. He paused again. Not consistent with empty. Lorraine and James looked at each other across the hotel table. Can you get me the address? James asked. Daniel gave it. Ikes wrote it on the hotel notepad. What are you going to do with it? Daniel asked. Nothing yet, Lorraine said. Just know where it is, she ended the call. Looked at the address. Want to see it, James said. Oh, you do. Not go in. Just see it. Understand the layout. He looked at the notepad. The people who searched your apartment this morning know what they didn't find. They're going to report back. Somewhere, she was quiet for a long moment. Minutes. Drive past, park a block away, assess from the car. If anything looks wrong, we leave. Agreed. They drove out to the east side at 9:15. Industrial district was exactly what the satellite images in Daniel's research had suggested. Cracked lots, chain-link perimeters. Buildings that looked like they'd been constructed when the city expected more industry than it ever attracted. Neighborhood of spaces waiting for a purpose that never came. The warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end street. Cinder block exterior, 3 loading bays on the west side, a single personnel door on the front. Windows on the upper level had been covered from inside, not boarded, covered. Which meant someone cared about what was visible from outside. 3 late-model dark SUVs in the front lot. Not construction equipment vehicles. Upper floor, northwest corner. A light was on. James sat with the engine running a block and a half away. Looked at the building with the eye of someone who had spent 14 years understanding how structures were put together. Basin door has a card reader, he said. Not a standard commercial system, that's a controlled access installation on an officially empty storage facility. Lorraine was quiet. 2nd floor, northwest corner, he said. That light, looked at her. If you were holding someone in that building, where would you put them? She looked at the building, at the covered windows, at the light, away from the loading bays. She said slowly, away from the ground floor where the risk of noise carrying outside is highest. 2nd floor, interior room, Somewhere you can manage sight lines and access. She looked at the corner with the light. Northwest, probably. A section furthest from the street. James looked at the building for another 30 seconds. Then he said, very calmly, Lorraine, what time does Sandra usually drop Noah at school? Lorraine went still. 8:15, he said. She texted me his schedule 3 weeks ago because I was picking him up for a dentist appointment. He kept his voice flat and factual because the alternative was the alternative. It is currently 9:22. She looked at him. But Sandra, she said, very quiet. He called. It rang 5 times. Sandra picked up on the 6th. James, I was going to call you. Something's wrong. Noah didn't come home on the bus. The school said someone called this morning and said you were picking him up early, and they let him go, and everything after that was noise. Not literally. Sandra was still talking. Information was arriving in orderly sequence. The school's automated system, the timestamp on the release, the name of the aide who had walked Noah to the car. All precise, all real. James was sitting in a parked car looking at a warehouse on the east side of Ashford, Virginia, and the corner with the light on, and the arithmetic was simple and terrible. Noah, his son, 7 years old and not home from school, and someone had called ahead to arrange it, which meant they had been watching Sandra's house, which meant they had known exactly where Noah was, and James had been precisely wrong this morning when he'd said they don't know about Noah. They had always known about Noah. They had just been waiting for the right moment to use him. He put truck into a drive. His hands were not shaking, aided them not to shake. Lorraine put her hand on his arm. James, her voice carried the specific steadiness of a person choosing to be steady on purpose. We are going to get him back. He didn't answer. He drove. Back at the hotel, the room, the table with the notepad that had the address of the warehouse written on it. James stood by the window. Lorraine sat at the table. Daniel was on the phone within 4 minutes of them arriving. Lorraine had called him while James was driving and given him 30 seconds of information in the precise clipped tone of someone transferring critical data under pressure. It rang. Unknown number. He answered. The voice on the line was calm. The voice of a man who had made many calls like this one and considered it a professional function no different from any other, Mr. Carter. Your son is safe. Etching cartoons, actually. He asked for a juice box and we gave him one, because we're not unreasonable people. James said nothing. Let the silence be whatever it needed to be. You and Miss Mitchell have put us in a difficult position. Article last night was unfortunate, but these things can be corrected. Miss Mitchell issues a public statement retracting her claims. Says the documentation was misrepresented to her. Mr. Brooks issues a correction citing faulty sourcing. Affirm that you accompanied Miss Mitchell under the impression the investigation was legitimate and were misled. A pause. Your son is home by morning. Clean. I want to talk to him, of course. A rustling sound. Then, Bah, it hit James in the center of his chest and stayed there. Hey, bud. His voice was even. It cost him something to keep it even. You okay? Noah's voice was trying hard. 7 years old and working so hard to hold the right frequency for his father. These people said they're your friends, that you sent them, I know. Listen to me. I need you to stay calm and do exactly what they tell you. Don't run. Don't argue. Stay calm. Can you do yes? A breath. Are you coming? Yes. No hesitation. I'm coming, Noah, I promise. Okay. The small voice doing enormous work. I love you, Bah. I love you too, bud. Professional voice came back, concluding the transaction. 24 hours. Instructions would follow. The implication of what happened if they didn't comply was left as an implication rather than a statement, because professional people doing this kind of work had learned that implications were more durable than explicit threats. The line went dead. James lowered the phone. Lorraine was already on her feet. Daniel, right on the hotel room desk where she'd propped the laptop, was already talking. People he knew. Options, the specific quiet urgency of someone who had just learned that the story he published 12 hours ago had a child in it now. James stood by the window and looked at the hotel parking lot and did not move for 30 seconds. Then he turned around. We're not recanting, he said. Not with anger. Not with the raised voice of fear looking for somewhere to land. Just with the flat certainty of a man who has decided completely and without reservation what the next move is. Lorraine looked at him. No, we're not. So we need Harold Reed. She looked at him, mentioned him when we first discussed going to the warehouse, James said. Former military, private security, owes Daniel a favor. Daniel didn't mention it casually. He mentioned it because he thought we might need it. He looked at Lorraine. Hide it now. She was already picking up her phone. Outside the window, the city went about its Friday. Cars, people. The ordinary motion of ordinary life, none of it knowing what was happening on the east side, a warehouse with covered windows and a card reader door, where a 7-year-old boy was drinking a juice box and working very hard to hold the right frequency for a father who was already coming. Because James Carter had decided, not with a speech, not with a declaration, not with anything that would look a certain way in someone else's telling. He had just decided the way he'd stop the truck on Monday afternoon, the way he'd run back into the fire, the way some things were going to happen regardless of whether they made sense on paper. He was going to get his son, and the only variable left was how. Harold Reed arrived at the hotel at 2 in the afternoon and looked exactly like what he was, not threatening, not dramatic, just a man in his late 40s who had clearly spent a significant portion of his life in situations where being calm was a professional requirement, and had internalized it so completely that calm was now simply his resting state. Broad shoulders, a close-cropped hair going gray at the temples. The particular stillness of someone whose threat assessment never fully powers down, even in a hotel room with bad carpet and a continental breakfast smell lingering in the hallway. Looked at James first, then at Lorraine, then at the notepad on the table with the warehouse address written on it. Daniel says you have a kid inside, 7 years old, James said. Taken from school this morning. How many people on site? Laid 3 vehicles outside. Daniel did a drive past an hour ago and confirmed the light on the second floor is still on. At least 4 people, probably more. The 2 we saw on the trail earlier this week were trained. Not street contractors. Harold nodded slowly. Victor Bryant ran his development operations through a general contractor network that has documented overlap with private security firms on the East Coast. I looked into it on the drive over. He set his bag on the floor. This isn't a criminal crew running improvised. These are people who do this for corporate clients and have protocols for it. Meaning what? Lorraine said. Meaning they're not going to hurt the kid unless something goes wrong. He's leverage, not a target. Harold looked at the address on the notepad, which also means they're expecting a negotiated resolution. Not a breach. He picked up the notepad, which means they haven't prepared for one. James looked at him. Can you do it? I can plan it. Whether we can execute depends on what I see when I get eyes on the building. He looked at Daniel, visible on the laptop screen at the corner of the table. You did a drive past, 40 minutes ago, Daniel said through the screen. SUVs, personnel door on the front with a card reader, loading bays on the west side appear unsecured from the exterior, but I didn't approach. Upper floor northwest corner has a light. Ground level, visible movement through the gaps in the window coverage. Loading bays, Harold set the notepad down. That's the entry point. Card readers fail against physical force, but they log access and create a record. Loading bay doors on a building that age are a different conversation entirely. He looked at James. You said you're in construction, framing and structural. 14 years. Commercial loading bay doors on a building from the late 80s. What are we looking at? Depending on when the building was last renovated, probably roll-up steel with a manual override cylinder on the interior side. They haven't added exterior hardware, which they wouldn't if the goal was maintaining the appearance of a vacant facility. There's usually a tension bar mechanism on the bottom bracket. Place it, and you can raise the door manually from outside if the frame hasn't been welded shut. Harold looked at him with the expression of someone adjusting an estimate upward. Show me when we get there, Lorraine's voice had a specific edge to it. You're staying in the car, James said. I'm not, Lorraine. He looked at her directly. The same look as in the canyon, in the smoke, when she'd told him to leave and he'd said not a chance, like asking permission, not opening a debate. You have a severely sprained ankle and no operational background, and you are the person Bryant most wants to locate right now. They stay in the car with Daniel on the line and you drive if something goes wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. The calculation running. Things she wanted to say visibly cycling through. He could see it. And then the honest conclusion she arrived at, which was that he was right and arguing would be noise. Fine, she said. Flat. Not happy. Fine. One more thing, Bucket said. He reached too tactical his bag, matte black, no insignia, and set them on the table, then a small, hard case. Body armor. Not negotiable. He looked at James. You know how to shoot? Rifles. Out some pistol work. Harold opened the case, checked the weapon methodically, cleared it, held it out handle first. Point, breathe, squeeze. Don't reach for it unless you have no other option. Your job is to get to the kid. My job is everything between the door and the kid, I understand. Say it back to me. My job is to get to Noah. Your job is everything else. Harold nodded. Then we go at 11. Dark enough, late enough that the guard rotation will be tired. Early enough that we're not competing with pre-dawn light changes. He looked at the warehouse address one more time. I need 3 hours to set up. Daniel, I want everything you have on that building's original permits and floor plan, like records, construction filings, anything filed with the city. Daniel was already typing. 20 minutes, Harold picked up his bag. I'll be back at 9. Eat something before then. Both of you, he looked at James specifically, especially you. Adrenaline burns clean when you've got fuel. It eats you when you don't. He left. The hotel room was quiet. James sat down at the table. Lorraine sat across from him. The laptop with Daniel's face on it stayed open at the corner. Outside the window, the afternoon was doing what Friday afternoons did. Loosening. The working week releasing its hold on the city an hour early the way it always did. Moving with the slightly different energy of people who were almost somewhere else. He's okay, Lorraine said. James looked at her. Noah, she held his gaze, steady, not reassuring him with a false promise. Just stating what they actually knew. He asked for a juice box. He's doing what you told him to do. He's holding on. James thought about his son at 4 years old on the bathroom floor during a high fever, iced and frightened, and James sitting with him on the cold tiles for 3 hours until it broke, talking about nothing. Rocket ships, the color of the kitchen floor mat, a dog 2 who's down, just being the voice. Noah knew in a situation Noah didn't. Be the voiced Noah knows. He could still do that much from here. Okay, he said. Let's look at the floor plan. They spent the next 2 hours on the building documents. The original construction permits were from 1987. 2 stories, cinder block exterior, 14,000 square feet of open warehouse space on the ground floor, a mezzanine level running the full interior perimeter at the 2nd floor height. Offices originally, built for a machine parts manufacturer that had relocated to Georgia in 1994. Mezzanine had been partially enclosed during a 2003 renovation that converted the northwest section into actual walled rooms. Northwest section. Walled rooms. 2nd floor. The light in the corner. James studied the floor plan until he had it in 3 dimensions. Not the drawing, but the actual physical reality of the space. The way any structure becomes real to him when he's looked long enough. The loading bay approach from the west. A stairwell at the northeast interior corner, the only documented access to the mezzanine level. The northwest rooms accessible from the mezzanine walkway. 1 way up, 1 path to the rooms. And Harold was going to have to manage the landing. At 9, Harold came back with 2 additional people he did not introduce by name. Even in her mid-30s with the same calibrated stillness Harold carried. The quality of someone who had learned to take up exactly the amount of space a situation required. No more. A man about the same age, taller, looked at the floor plan for 4 minutes and then looked up and said, in a voice like low gravel, loading bay 3. The frame's original, I can have it open in 90 seconds. James didn't ask how he knew. Expertise announces itself the same way regardless of the field it comes from. They ran through it once. Positions, timing, signals. Harold's system was simple enough to hold under stress and specific enough to be executable. Aims recognized as the marker of good planning in any domain. Not elaborate, just clear. Lorraine sat at the table and listened to all of it without interrupting. When they finished, Harold looked at her. Questions? Anything goes wrong inside and you need more time, she said. What's the signal for me to call it in? 2 texts in sequence from James's number, 15 seconds apart. At the FBI field office in Richmond and give them the address and the name Victor Bryant. Federal only, not local, she nodded. And if I get one text? One text means we're out and moving to the car. Have the engine running, understood? Looked at the floor plan one more time. Then she looked at James. You're going to find him in that corner room. He's going to be scared, and he's going to try not to show it because that's who he is. She paused. I get to him. Don't talk first. Just hold on. James looked at her. She'd said it the way you say something you actually know. Not to comfort, not to fill the silence. She'd been paying attention for 5 days, and she understood something specific about the relationship between a father and a son when they'd both been trying to be strong for each other through a phone. Yeah, he said. 11 o'clock, the east side of the city had emptied into the specific quiet that industrial districts achieve at night. Not peaceful exactly, but vacated. The ambient hum of the highway 2 miles west, occasional distant sound of a freight train on the line to the north, and otherwise nothing. No foot traffic, no open businesses. Just cracked pavement and chain link, and the patient darkness of buildings waiting out the hours. A warehouse sat at the end of its dead-end street with the upper-level lights on, and the 3 SUVs in the lot, and the covered windows and the card reader door, a building that had been put to a purpose it was never built for, took its job quietly while the rest of the city slept. Lorraine pulled the rental car to a stop a block and a half out, engine running, lights off. James in the passenger seat, he looked at the building for a moment. She didn't say anything. Earned over 5 days when words were useful, and when they cost more than they were worth. He got out. Harold and the other 2 were already moving. They'd parked on the adjacent street and come through the empty lot to the west on foot, light figures crossing cracked asphalt in the dark, reaching the loading bay wall, without triggering anything from the building's exterior, because the people inside had planned for a negotiation. Not a breach. There is a meaningful operational difference between those 2 plans. One of them leaves a gap. James moved to loading bay 3. The taller man was already at the frame, working a mechanism James couldn't see clearly in the dark but recognized by sound. The specific metallic tension of a release bar being manipulated by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Positioned himself at the corner of the building with a line of sight on the personnel door. The woman took the parking lot corner with eyes on the SUVs, 90 seconds. Then the bay door groaned once, just once, and rose 6 feet. Darkness inside. The smell of a building that had been running electronics in a space not designed for it. Warm air despite the October night. The low, persistent hum of something electrical that had been on for weeks. They moved in, ground floor, Vegas and dim. A folding card table near the south wall with coffee cups and a radio. 3 duffel bags against the wall beside it. Someone had been living out of this space, not comfortably. Efficiency of people who knew how to sustain an operation. The setup had been running here for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Before the article. Before the apartment break-in. Before any of it went public. Victor Bryant had established this as infrastructure before he needed it as a response. He'd built the contingency in advance, which meant the escalation to using Noah hadn't been improvised in the last 24 hours. That had been a pre-planned option in a situation Bryant had anticipated might eventually arrive. The thought settled in James's chest like something cold. The stairwell was exactly where the floor plan said it would be. Northeast interior corner. Metal stairs, the kind that ring under weight if you're not careful about placement. Harold went first. The woman second. James third. The taller man held position on the ground floor. The mezzanine landing, one man at the top of the stairs. Dark jacket. Sitting in a folding chair with a coffee cup balanced on his knee and a phone in his hand, eyes on the screen, not on the stairs. Because the stairs were inside a secured building with a card reader door and covered windows and people in the parking lot. And who was going to come up the stairs at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. Who indeed? Light moved, with a precision of economy that compressed the distance between himself and the man in the folding chair into something that lasted approximately 4 seconds. No sound worth measuring. Like the man and the chair and the coffee cup remained exactly in their positions, except that the man was no longer conscious. Harold looked at James, moved his head toward the northwest corridor. They moved. The mezzanine walkway was narrow, running along the interior wall. 4 doors on the left side, the northwest section that the 2003 renovation had converted into actual rooms. 3 doors open, dark interiors, storage, nothing. The 4th door at the far end was closed. Light underneath it, not much. A lamp-level glow, not overhead fluorescence enough. James reached the door, looked at Harold. Harold nodded. James tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back, 1 step, 2. Made himself a runway, and drove his shoulder into the door at the latch point, the way he'd learned from 14 years of construction work, where locked interior doors sometimes needed to be dealt with, and waiting for a key wasn't an option. James splintered. The door swung, a lamp on the floor, plugged into an extension cord running under the door, a sleeping bag against the far wall, a juice box drained, next to a paper plate with the remnants of a sandwich. Like the specific evidence of someone trying to make a bad situation marginally less bad for a child. And Noah, sitting up on the sleeping bag, blinking against the sudden light and the open doorway. Aikmot, 7 years old and wearing his school clothes from that morning, trying very hard to determine whether what was happening was good or bad before committing to a reaction. His eyes found James, and that was it. That was everything. The careful composure, the trying not to show it that Lorraine had named correctly, lasted exactly 1 more second. Lowered. Then Noah was across the room, and James was on his knees, and Noah was in his arms, and neither of them said anything for a long time, because some things are just true whether you say them or not. Saying them would make them smaller than they are. James held his son and felt Noah shaking, not crying, just the physical release of hours of held-together tension leaving a 7-year-old's body all at once. And held tighter. Let it go with him. They stayed like that until Harold said, quietly but with intent, "We need to move now." Ground floor, loading bay. The cool air of the parking lot opening up in front of them. They were almost out. Almost. The exterior lights came on. Not the building's interior lights. Exterior floods mounted on the warehouse corners, legged remotely, flooding the parking lot in flat white that turned everything in it into a tableau. 3 figures at the personnel door. And standing in front of them, a suit that was wrong for 11 o'clock at night in an industrial lot, but absolutely correct for a man who dressed as a signal of control in all circumstances, was Victor Bryant, 61 years old. Silver hair, well cut, face of a man who had spent so many years smiling in professional contexts that the smile had become a default state, present now even here, even in this situation, though it was doing a different kind of work than comfort, unhurried. Unhurried was the posture he had decided to hold Mr. Carter. The voice was the voice from the phone call. Calm. The tone of someone conducting a meeting that happens to be taking place in a parking lot at 11 at night. "I thought we had an arrangement." James set Noah down, deliberately, put himself between his son and the 3 men at the door. Harold and the woman flanked left and right, not rushing, not escalating, just positioning. Geometry of people who knew that the next 30 seconds were about information, not action. "The arrangement involved my son," James said. "So the arrangement is done." Bryant's expression didn't change. It caused us significant difficulties. The article was unfortunate, but manageable. Stories have corrections. Evidence gets contextualized. What can't be undone is your physical presence here tonight, which creates an entirely different set of aimed to be explained very clearly to the FBI field office in Richmond. Lorraine's voice. She was standing at the edge of the loading bay door behind James. She had not stayed in the car. She had, at some point in the previous minutes, made the assessment that some situations were not stay-in-the-car situations and walked here anyway. James looked at her. She did not look at him. She looked at Bryant, Victor Bryant, his name the way she'd said Malcolm Hayes's name in the commissioner's office. Not a greeting, an identification. CEO of Summit Ridge Development, operating through Blue Ridge Heritage Partners and Crestline Property Holdings. Aided the fire at Cascade Ridge. You ordered the break-in of my office on Tuesday night and my apartment Friday morning. And you ordered the abduction of a 7-year-old child from his school. She looked at the 3 men flanking him. Right gentlemen are going to want to think very carefully about their next action, because every piece of that documentation has been with the FBI for, she checked her phone, 47 minutes. Bryant's smile stayed. Something behind it shifted. Not fear, but the specific micro-expression of a person whose plan has failed at a critical component and who is running the contingency in real time. Miss Mitchell, still pleasant, still performing unhurried. Documentation you've compiled is circumstantial at best. We have legal teams who have reviewed. The timer was set for 10:45, she said. 90 seconds after I confirmed James was inside the building. I've collected over 14 months. Daniel Brooks's financial mapping, the permit timeline, the foundation connection to Hayes, the utility records on this building specifically. She looked at him steadily. It's uploaded. It's logged. Already being reviewed by people whose jurisdiction this is. A pause. You cannot unring that bell. The three men behind Bryant were conducting a private conversation with their eyes. Not breaking ranks yet, but the conversation was clearly happening. Bryant looked at her for a long moment, then at James, then at Harold, who stood with his arms at his sides in a posture that communicated nothing overtly threatening, and therefore communicated everything. Then something happened in Bryant's face that was more interesting than anger or defiance. He made a decision. James could see it occur, the specific internal architecture of a man choosing to cut his losses rather than escalate to a point where the consequences became irreversible. Bryant had lawyers. Bryant had resources. Bryant had 20 years of structural insulation between himself and any single piece of evidence. An FBI investigation was a serious problem. A dead man or a dead child in a parking lot was a problem of an entirely different magnitude that no lawyer could contain. He stepped back. We're done here, Bryant said, to his men, not to James or Lorraine. Walked to one of the SUVs and got in and drove away. His men followed. 30 seconds and the parking lot was just a parking lot again. Harold exhaled once. Controlled. That's the first time that's ever happened to me, he said, at the dryness of a man who had enough reference points to know when something was unusual. James turned to Noah. Noah was looking at the space where Bryant's car had been, running whatever the 7-year-old equivalent of a tactical assessment was without looking up. Was that the man who took me? One of the people responsible, yes. Is he going to get in trouble? Yes. James crouched to his son's level, looked at Noah's face in the flat white of the exterior lights, the face that had held itself together in a room with a lamp on the floor and a stranger's sleeping bag for an entire day. Yes, he is. Noah looked at him. Are you okay? Such an entirely Noah question. To be the one asking it after everything, that James almost laughed. The pressure behind his sternum was too complicated for laughing yet, but he could feel that it would be eventually. Soon, I'm okay. He put both hands on his son's shoulders. Are you okay? Noah considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I want to go home. Yeah, James straightened up, took his son's hand. Yeah, let's go home. He looked at Lorraine, just standing at the edge of the bay door, with the bag over her shoulder and the ankle that hadn't been adequately rested, still taking her weight. Her eyes on Noah held something she probably didn't know was visible. Something careful and specific and real, the kind of expression that doesn't have a professional context. You didn't stay in the car, James said. No, they specifically talked about staying in the car. We talked about a lot of things. She looked at him. You were inside and Bryant drove up, and I made an assessment, and the upload was real. I did it from the car before I got out. She paused. Isn't bluffing. He looked at her for a moment. At this woman who had been in a burning canyon 5 days ago and had not stopped moving since, who had made a serious mistake with Hayes and owned it without drama and adjusted, had sat on a bathroom floor for an hour and then stood back up and walked into every subsequent hard thing without being asked. Good call, he said. Something shifted in her expression. Simpler than usual, cleaner. Evanpool standing in a parking lot at 11:30 at night with a 7-year-old between them and a crisis that was finally actually over. Thank you, she said. And this time it carried everything the previous times hadn't. Yeah, he said. Harold was already on the phone, specific, giving the address and Bryant's name and the direction of travel of the SUVs to someone at the FBI field office who was going to have a very busy night. The Virginia State Police were going to have questions. The whole machinery of accountability was going to start turning in the next 2 hours. and it was going to keep turning because Lorraine had spent 14 months building a case so solid that once it started moving, it moved on its own. James took Noah's hand and walked toward the car. Malcolm Hayes was arrested at his home at 6:14 the following morning. James learned this from a news alert on his phone, looking at while sitting at his kitchen table at 7:30, with Noah asleep upstairs, and a cup of coffee going cold beside the open laptop. Hayes had been cooperative almost immediately. The particular cooperation of a man who had been waiting for the knock on the door long enough that its arrival was almost a relief. Bryant had been picked up at Richmond International at 7:15. Made it to the gate. He had not made it onto the plane. His legal team was already issuing statements. James read the first paragraph of the first one and stopped. The first paragraph was the whole statement in miniature. These allegations are without merit. Our client cooperates fully with any legitimate inquiry, as confident the facts will bear out. And he had read all the facts and knew exactly what they bore out. Daniel Brooks's story had 800,000 unique readers by Saturday morning, a number that meant nothing to James, except that it meant the information was out in a form that could not be recalled, that every person who read it had the documentation and the photographs and the permit timeline and could draw the same conclusion that anyone with functioning eyes would draw. Lorraine texted at 8:15, one line, Hayes arrested, Bryant in custody, each doing formal statement at 10. He wrote back, Noah's still asleep, a pause then good. Let him sleep, then, after a moment, how are you? It at the end instead of a question mark. Not a pleasantry, a real question requiring a real answer. He thought about it honestly, sitting in his kitchen with cold coffee and his son upstairs and news alerts coming in, and the particular hollow quality of the aftermath of something. Not empty, not bad, like the specific texture of a space that has been under sustained pressure and is now finally not. The release of it felt like its own kind of weight. Working on it, he typed then, come over, Noah, will want to see you when he wakes up, 3 dots. Appeared. Okay, she wrote. Give me an hour. He made fresh coffee, started breakfast. Light came through the kitchen window at its usual angle and did its usual thing to the countertops and the table and the particular blue of the kitchen floor mat he'd bought 3 years ago and had somehow never replaced despite meaning to. Airy light on ordinary surfaces. Noah came down the stairs at 9:15. The specific rhythm of feet that aren't quite awake yet, negotiating each step individually. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair everywhere. Yesterday's school clothes replaced last night with pajamas. The first thing he'd wanted to do when they got home was change out of the clothes he'd been wearing, and James had let him, and then had sat on the edge of the bed while Noah settled and had talked about nothing much until Noah's breathing evened out. Noah stood in the doorway and did the check he always did in the mornings, the quick inventory that James had only recently recognized as something Noah had been doing for a long time without James noticing. You're still here, Noah said. Else would I be? Noah padded across the kitchen and sat down at the table. Sometimes you're gone early for work, not today. Noah looked at the table. At the second coffee cup. Is someone coming, Lorraine? Later this morning, Noah nodded slowly. Processing. Then, with the particular precision that children deploy when they've been thinking about something for a while and have chosen their moment. She came last night. To the building, she did. Didn't have to do that. No, James said. She didn't. Noah picked up the juice glass James had put out. Drank, set it down, Those people took me because of what you were doing. James sat down across from him. Yes, and you didn't stop. Oh, because stopping would have meant the bad guys won. That's part of it. What's the other part? James looked at his son, at the rocket ships on the pajamas, hiked at the hair that was going to require significant negotiation before any public appearance, at the face that was already, somehow the face of the person Noah was going to be. The same fundamental architecture, just earlier in its construction. Other part is that someone needed help, James said. And I couldn't figure out how to be the kind of person who walks away from that. Noah thought about this with genuine seriousness. Even when it was dangerous, even then, that's who you are. That's who I want to be. It's not always the same thing. Noah nodded, turned the juice glass in his hands. I wasn't scared, he said. And then, the precision of a 7-year-old who had decided honesty was the relevant category. I was scared, but I remembered what you said, and I just kept doing that, staying calm. And waiting. He looked up, as I knew you were coming. I knew it like... He searched for the right word, with the same seriousness he brought to everything. Like how I know the sun comes up. I didn't have to think about whether it was true. I just knew. Ames sat with that for a long moment. His son had held onto that in a room with a lamp on the floor and a stranger's sleeping bag, and it had been enough. Because the knowing was enough. Like some things you build over 7 years, one ordinary Tuesday at a time, one promise kept after another until the thing you've built is structural, load-bearing, true, present exactly when it needs to be. Okay, James said. Pancakes, a kind? The only kind, Noah grinned. The ordinary grin of a kid making an ordinary Saturday morning request. James turned to the stove before his son could see whatever was happening in his face. Lorraine arrived at 10:30 with coffee from the place 3 blocks over, the one that required 15 minutes in line and was worth it in a way the hotel coffee and the gas station and the terrible diner stuff had none of them been, and a brown bag that turned out to contain croissants, which Noah approached with the seriousness of someone conducting an evaluation. These are really good, Noah said, around a mouthful. They're supposed to be. She set the tray on the counter, looked at James, the 2-second look that carried the whole conversation they hadn't had yet, and were going to have later in a different register, when there was space for it. Sit down, James said. Coffee's fresh, she sat. Ankle was still making itself known. Visible in the slight adjustment in how she settled into the chair, the preference for keeping it extended rather than bent. She was going to need to actually rest it at some point, a conversation they had not yet had, and which was going to go approximately the way the stay-in-the-car conversation had gone. Noah finished his croissant, looked at her. You weren't scared last night, he said. They talked to that man. Lorraine looked at him. I was scared. You didn't sound it. Sometimes sounding not scared is the thing that matters in the moment. She picked up her coffee. You can be scared and still say what needs to be said. Doesn't have to run the conversation. Noah considered this. Like when I had to give my presentation at school and I really didn't want to, but I did it anyway. Exactly like that. Mine was about the water cycle. What was the hardest part? Starting. He looked at his croissant. Once I started, it was okay. It was just getting the first word out. That's always the hardest part, she said. For everyone. Every time, looked at his son. And this woman talking about school presentations at his kitchen table on a Saturday morning after a week that had included a wildfire, 2 break-ins, a kidnapping, and a parking lot confrontation with a man now in federal custody. The contrast wasn't ironic. It was just life doing what life does. Pressing forward, insisting on its own ordinariness, room for croissants, and the water cycle and the particular comfort of a table where everyone present is safe. He drank his coffee and let them talk. Weeks after had their own texture. Bryant's legal team was expensive and energetic and produced a counter-narrative about investigative overreach and competitive sabotage. James read the first statement once and did not read the rest, because the rest was more of the same, and the same was not going to change what was in the evidence. The evidence was the evidence. It didn't require his attention to remain true. Writing, Daniel Brooks published a follow-up piece 10 days after the arrests, the complete financial mapping piece he'd been sitting on, now with the context of the FBI's preliminary findings to give it additional weight. A non-profit foundation structure, the commissioner appointments, the 20-year architecture of accumulated influence that had created a regulatory environment where $50 million of documented fraud could proceed without a single genuine intervention. Malcolm Hayes pleaded guilty in the first week of negotiations, 12 counts. His cooperation agreement put him across the table from federal investigators for 37 hours over 3 weeks, fetching a detailed account of how the foundation influence structure operated and which other members of the regional regulatory apparatus had been participating. More names, more charges. The machinery, once engaged, not required James or Lorraine to keep pushing it. That was the point of building the case the way they had. Not so that they'd have to run behind it, but so that when it started moving, it moved on its own weight. Lift Ridge was declared a protected conservation area 6 weeks after the arrests. No development, no permits, no resort. Wetland on the eastern section was formally catalogued by the Virginia Department of Conservation as a significant habitat corridor, which meant it was real again, on paper, in the official record, which meant 40 acres of federally protected wetland that had officially not existed for 3 years was officially existing again, something that had been there all along, just unacknowledged. James read the conservation order on his phone during a lunch break on the framing job. Sat on a cooler with a sandwich and read the whole thing, which was mostly bureaucratic language with no interest in being readable, but contained buried in the middle a single sentence about the eastern wetland area constituting a significant habitat corridor supporting multiple protected species, preservation of which was critical to the ecological integrity of the broader canyon system. He sent the link to Lorraine without comment. She wrote back 3 minutes later. "That's everything we fought for in one paragraph," he wrote back, and after a moment, "Dinner tonight?" He looked at that question sitting in the conversation, natural, easy, as if they'd been having this particular conversation for longer than 6 weeks. "Yeah," he typed. "I'll cook, you cook?" Oa says it's acceptable. I consider that high praise. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November, and James had told himself for 2 weeks that he didn't need to be there. Bryant's legal team was going to do what legal teams do, were going to do what federal prosecutors do, and the outcome of the preliminary hearing was essentially predetermined by the weight of evidence assembled before James Carter ever ran back into a fire on a Monday afternoon in October. He didn't need to be there. He went anyway. The courthouse had been built to be serious and had succeeded. Granite steps, heavy doors, a specific acoustic quality of a space designed to remind everyone inside it that what happens here matters and will be recorded. The gallery was fuller than he'd expected. Reporters with laptops, environmental activists in organized rows, a contingent from the canyon communities who had been fighting the Summit Ridge project for 2 years before any of this broke publicly. People who had been in this fight longer than James had known it existed. He found a seat near the back. Lorraine was already there, near the front, with Daniel beside her. She looked different in this context. Professional, precise, version of herself that she had built over 12 years. Of running a company in rooms where she was frequently underestimated, and had learned to make that underestimation work against the people doing it. The portfolio, and she was writing something in it without looking at the room. She looked up, found him, gave him a nod, short, contained, acknowledgement of 2 people who know what they know without needing to perform it at each other. He nodded back. Bryant came in with his legal team. The suit was still right. The posture still performed unhurried, but diminished. Not visibly, not in any way a camera would capture, but in the way that a structure is diminished when you remove the foundational piece. Something load-bearing was gone. The whole thing was still standing, but you could see, if you knew what to look for, where the weight had shifted. When they called for victim impact statements, Lorraine stood. She walked to the front without the crutch. The ankle had finally, after 6 weeks of being consistently badgered by her doctor and by James in approximately equal measure, received enough consecutive days of rest to bear weight without visible compensation. At the podium with the portfolio closed in her hands, she didn't open it. "I'm a CEO," she began. "I run a clean energy company. I've spent 12 years building something I believe matters. Infrastructure that reduces the damage we do to the places we live. So when I started investigating Summit Ridge development, I thought I was doing due diligence. Make sure a project I was evaluating was what it claimed to be." She paused. "What I found instead was a system designed to be invisible, not illegal-looking, invisible. Like the kind of fraud that works precisely because it resembles civic engagement, professional courtesy, institutional relationships. The kind that requires years of construction to function for a single afternoon." Looked at her hands on the closed portfolio. Then up, Victor Bryant built that system, and he used it not just to commit fraud, but to ensure that anyone who tried to expose the fraud had nowhere legitimate to go. No trustworthy regulator. No clean chain of reporting. Nothing that couldn't be accessed and managed and neutralized before it reached daylight. The courtroom held its quiet. He ordered a fire to be set that could have killed me or destroyed the evidence, or both. Ordered the apartment of a private citizen to be ransacked. He ordered the abduction of a 7-year-old child to silence the man who helped me survive that fire. She looked at Bryant directly, not with anger, with the particular directness of a person who has been thinking about this moment for weeks and has decided that clarity is more powerful than heat. He did all of this as if it were a rational business decision, risk management calculation. I want this court to understand that specifically, not the fraud, because the court understands the fraud, but the part where a child becomes a variable in a cost-benefit analysis. I want that part to have a price. She stepped back from the podium. I'm asking this court to hold him accountable for what he built, she said. Not just the specific violations, but the world those violations created, the world where evidence can be burned and witnesses can be intimidated, and the structures meant to protect people have been purchased and turned around. That world costs something to build. That cost should come due here. She sat down. The gallery held its quiet for a moment before it remembered itself. James was called next. He walked to the front with nothing in his hands, at the podium, and thought about what Lorraine had said at the diner in the beginning of all this, that the starting is always the hardest part. And he started, "I'm not good at this," he said. "I'm a construction worker. I raise my son. I try to stay out of situations that require standing in a federal courtroom." He looked at Bryant for a moment. Then away. "I ran back into a wildfire on a Monday afternoon because I heard someone calling for help. I want to be clear. I didn't know anything about Summit Ridge or Victor Bryant or any of it. I just heard a voice and couldn't figure out how to keep driving. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when they're actually listening. I was in it. Because once you know something, you can't unknow it. Once you've seen the documentation, once you've stood in the wetland that officially doesn't exist, heard the men on the burned trail saying the boss wants to make sure she didn't leave anything behind. You can't put that back in the box and drive away." He paused. "They took my son. They took him from school, a place he was supposed to be safe, and they used him to try to make me be the kind of person who gets back in the truck. And I want the court to know, my son is 7 years old, sat in a room in that warehouse, and held himself together for an entire day because he knew I was coming. Because we have built that between us, over 7 years. That knowing," he stopped. Looked at his hands on the edge of the podium. Actor Bryant tried to use that against me. I want the sentencing to reflect that he chose to make a child pay for a man's decision to not look away. He sat down, the proceedings continued. The judge, 70s, sharp-eyed, a bearing of someone who had heard enough arguments to have stopped being impressed by skill and had become interested only in substance. Listened to everything with the attention of someone doing real work. Bryant was held without bail pending trial. Victor Bryant was convicted 8 months later on all counts: fraud, bribery of public officials, conspiracy to commit arson, kidnapping, 25 years federal, eligible for parole consideration after 15. He was 62 at sentencing. The math was simple. James was at work when Daniel texted him the verdict. He read it twice, put the phone in his pocket, picked up the nail gun and went back to what he'd been doing. His crew chief looked at him from across the framing. "Good news or bad news? Verdict came in, Summit Ridge thing, yeah, and guilty. All counts." The crew chief nodded once, bucked, and went back to work. "Because that was what you did with good news in the middle of a job. You acknowledged it and kept moving, because the job was still there, and the framing didn't care what day it was." James kept moving. There's a hiking trail in Cascade Ridge that runs along the eastern wall of the canyon. It passes, if you know to look, a granite boulder about 1.5 miles in, large, pushed against the canyon wall by some geological event too old to trace. There is a section of rock face above it that extends outwards slightly, creating a natural overhang. And in August, even in the driest year on record, if you look east from that point and know what you're looking at, see standing water among the vegetation across 40 acres, the wetland, present as it always was, real as it always was, just visible again, James and Lorraine went back up in the spring, not because they needed to, because Noah asked, like the specific persistence of a 7-year-old, who has decided something is going to happen and is simply waiting out the logistical delays. He wanted to see where his father had run into the fire. He wanted to see where Lorraine had been, until James suspected, to stand in the actual physical location and make it real in a way that being told about it couldn't fully accomplish. So they went spring, had done what spring does in burned terrain, pushed green through the black, busted the fire scars in wildflowers that had been waiting for exactly this combination of cleared ground and available light. The canyon didn't look restored, it looked like itself again, which was different, back to what it was before but moved forward into what it was now, the fire a part of its history rather than its definition. Noah walked ahead on the trail, reported on things he found, a particular rock formation, a bird he recognized from his book, a section where the new growth had closed so densely over the path that you had to push through it. He moved with the confidence of a child who had decided this place belonged to him in some way he was still in the process of defining. Lorraine walked beside James. They hadn't formalized anything explicitly. There hadn't been a designated moment where what was between them got named or made official in a way that would look like a beginning from the outside. It had just accumulated. Dinners that became a pattern, hangs on the porch that stretched past midnight, that specific ease of two people who had spent enough time in each other's company during genuinely difficult circumstances that easy circumstances felt like a continuation rather than something new. Noah had stopped asking if she was Bar's girlfriend approximately 3 weeks in. He had simply begun assuming it, which James discovered when Noah mentioned Lorraine to Sandra in a context that made the assumption structurally clear. Sandra had called James and said, in the tone she reserved for things she found both predictable and quietly pleasing, "He's not wrong, you know." James had not argued the point. They reached the boulder at the 1.5 mile mark. Noah studied it with his arms crossed, the way he studied things he was taking seriously. "Here," he said. "Here," Lorraine confirmed. Noah looked at the overhang above, at the section of wall where they'd waited while the fire moved past, walked around the boulder once, examined the base, looked back at his father. "You were carrying her, I was, and you waited here, 15 minutes, and then the fire moved, and then the fire moved." Noah looked out at the canyon, at the green that had replaced the black, at the light coming down through the new growth at an angle that wasn't the same angle it would have come through the old trees. Brighter, more open. A space changes when you remove something that had been filling it. He was quiet for a moment, working something out. "Bar," he said finally, "do you think it was worth it? Everything that happened?" James looked at his son, the question which was a real one. At the face asking it, which was the face of a kid who had been through something real and wanted a real answer. "I think," James said, "I stopped a truck on a Monday afternoon because I heard someone call for help, and everything else came from that." He paused. "I don't know if that's worth it in the math of it, but I know I couldn't have not stopped. I know what I've got because I did." Noah thought about this, looked at Lorraine, looked back at his father. "I'm glad you stopped," he said. James looked at his son standing at the edge of the viewpoint in the spring light, looking out at a canyon that was alive again, because someone had refused to let it be buried under concrete and falsified paperwork, and felt the specific truth of what Noah had just said settle into him the way real things settle, not with impact but with weight, permanent, structural. He reached for Lorraine's hand, found it. She didn't look at him, just held on. Brief and certain, the way you confirm something that doesn't require elaboration. Noah was already moving further down the trail, reporting on something he'd spotted near the path. They followed. The canyon spread out below them, plain and recovering and impossibly alive. Somewhere in the language of the conservation order, in the middle of a paragraph no one would ever quote, a wetland existed again that had always existed and would now continue to. Protected, catalogued, officially real in the record of things that mattered. Some things get named too late. Some things get named exactly when they need to be. Later, James Carter had stopped a truck on a Monday afternoon in October because he heard a voice and couldn't figure out how to keep driving. And that decision, 40 seconds on a gravel shoulder. Played one man, and the specific shape of his conscience had led through fire and evidence and parking lots and courtrooms and 8 months of legal proceedings to this particular hillside on a particular spring morning. His son ahead of him on the trail and a woman's hand in his and a canyon coming back into itself below. He didn't know what you called that. He knew what it felt like. It felt like the thing worth fighting for. It felt like home.